Well, greetings, vinyl community. This will be a Vinyl Finds video catching up with some of the records that I've picked up over the past couple of months. And I'm going to start off with a clutch of great jazz albums on the Impulse label. I know everyone on the VC is all about Blue Note, and so am I. But for me, Impulse is really tops, and not least because it was the home of John Coltrane during these classic years. This is the album simply titled Coltrane, and not the first album that was simply titled Coltrane, since he had another one on Prestige in the 50s. But this is the 1962 album on Impulse by the classic quartet with Elvin Jones, Jimmy Garrison, and McCoy Tyner. He does three standards: Out of This World, Soul Eyes, and The Inchworm, and two originals, Tunji and Miles Mode, and it's just a great, deeply beautiful album. This is a beautiful copy too, not a first pressing. It's on the red-ringed Impulse label, and if you look closely, you'll see it's the Impulse label with two little trademark signs on either side of the Impulse logo. That indicates it's from around 1971 or thereabouts, because it doesn't have the P copyright that Impulse adopted for the labels in 1972. But what's amazing about it is that I got this with the shrink wrap still on. I'm always amazed when you can find, it wasn't new, it wasn't sealed, it had been opened on the side, but they'd left the shrink wrap on even though it's a gatefold album. So the cover was just pristine when I got it. And all these other Impulse albums are similarly on the red-ringed label, although the earlier version without those little register marks on the sides of the Impulse logo. So these are all 68 through 71 pressings, thereabouts. John Coltrane again. John Coltrane Quartet Plays. This is the follow-up from 1965 to A Love Supreme. Again, there are a couple of covers, if you want to call it that, in a jazz performance. Not really standards. They're too new to be standards. Chim Chim Cheree and Nature Boy. I call them standards now. Chim Chim Cheree, obviously a bit of an attempt to recreate the magic of the John Coltrane version of My Favorite Things. Again, it's a song associated with Julie Andrews, a Julie Andrews movie anyway. Nature Boy, pop song. So kind of a little bit of a, I don't want to say retrenchment or a falling back, but a detour maybe on the way from that was being pointed by A Love Supreme, because this was the last time Coltrane would include songs by other composers on his studio albums. Nonetheless, it's a brilliant album. Again, it's the classic quartet, as the title implies, although they are augmented by Art Davis playing the second bass on Nature Boy. And one more John Coltrane release, a posthumous one this time. Selflessness, featuring My Favorite Things. And in fact, the label of the album shows the title of the album as My Favorite Things. So these are live performances from 1963 of My Favorite Things and Billy Eckstine's I Want to Know About You, performed by the almost the classic quartet, with Roy Haynes substituting on drums while Elvin Jones was doing a spell in the pokey, having dabbled a bit too much in those unauthorized substances. And the album is completed by a studio recording from 1965 with John Coltrane and Pharoah Sanders on tenor, Donald Garrett on bass clarinet and bass, McCoy Tyner on piano, Jimmy Garrison bass, Elvin Jones on drums, Frank Butler on drums, Juno Lewis on percussion. So that is another sampling from the sessions that gave us the Kulu Se Mama album. Another classic from Impulse, Mingus, 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 by Mingus. Great band. He's got Eric Dolphy on this, Jackie Bayard, Walter Perkins on drums, as well as the faithful Danny Richmond. Just a bunch of people on here. Kind of his orchestral big band trip. This is the second of the 3 albums Mingus made for Impulse, and recorded in 1963, released in 1964. And what can I say? It's absolute genius. Includes a lot of his best-known tracks, a lot. Theme for Lester Young, better known as Goodbye Pork Pie Hat, Better Get Hit in Your Soul, and version of Mood Indigo by Duke Ellington, of course. Again, on that red-ringed Impulse label. And finally, for the Impulse group, Pharoah Sanders' Jewels of Thought, 1969 follow-up to the brilliant Karma album. This is a somewhat smaller group than the one that recorded Karma. Not quite all those orchestral colors with the French horn and the flute and all that we had, but you still got Leon Thomas on vocals, Lonnie Liston Smith on piano, Richard Davis and Cecil McBee playing bass, Idris Muhammad on drums, Roy Haynes on drums, who we last heard of playing with John Coltrane. Another great, great album from that period, very much of that period. And 2 more jazz albums from the Wildflowers series. There were 5 LPs recorded in Sam Rivers' New York City loft. And this volume 1 features Kala Parusha, Ken McIntyre, Sonny Murray and the Untouchable Factor featuring Bayard Lancaster, Sam Rivers himself playing with a trio, and Air with Henry Threadgill, Fred Hopkins, and Steve McCall. I completed my collection of these by getting this one and bookending it number 5, which is 2 sidelong pieces. Side 1 is by Sonny Murray, again with Bayard Lancaster, with David Murray, and Fred Hopkins performing, as well as Khan Jamal on vibes. And side 2 is Chant by Roscoe Mitchell, playing in a trio with Jerome Cooper on percussion, and it's Don Moye, or Moye is credited as Don Moore on drums on this. And leaving the jazz world, move on to the contemporary classical world with Kenneth Gabriel. Kenneth Gabriel was an American composer, originally from New Jersey. He was on the faculty at UC San Diego, overlapping the time that I was there, but I did not have any personal contact with him. This is his piece Lingua No. 2, Maledetto, or Curse. And this is a text sound piece. Gabriel was very much into linguistics and the sound of speech. This is an amazing, trippy piece based on the word screw and all the various meanings of the word screw and the history of the mechanical screw and the etymology of the word screw and associated things connected with it, all spoken by 7 voices, is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 voices. all overlapping in a just kaleidoscopic whirl of words. And it's an amazing thing to hear. It's definitely not for your Aunt Myrtle. This is on the CRI label. And another one by Kenneth Gabriel. This is his None Such release of music for voices, instruments, and electronic sounds. And that pretty much does what it says on the label. It's music for voices, instruments, and electronic sounds. Particular favorite on here is the last piece, Exit Music 2, Fat Millie's Lament. And this is accompanied by a poem, which Gabriel says is on her behalf, in her behalf. Fat Millie must squash her what? Every time she sits, I think. Ooh-ee, 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 squack. Ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-whack. And just so you can see how that's laid out on the page, there is the poem. This is Culture Time at the Vinyl Community. I'll be right back after this message. Well, surprise, surprise, there's actually no message from our sponsor, but I knew I was going to do this in segments. I have a lot of records to show, and I take them out of the plastic sleeves before showing them because I don't want the glare, even though I see there was quite a bit of glare from a couple of those shiny laminated impulses. And I don't want to just have a huge stack of plastic sleeves all at once. So the next group, a few weeks ago, the only local vinyl store in San Mateo, Vinyl Solution, reopened for physical visits. And I went and had a look to see what they had, and wasn't able to find much, but just for the sake of support, I picked up a couple of items. First of which is Cook by PFM, the Italian prog rock band, originally called Premiata Forneria Marconi. They had a couple of US releases under that name, and it was just shortened to PFM for this live album from 1975? Recorded in 1974 and released on Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Manticore label in 1974, yeah. So this was the follow-up to their album The World Became the World in America, which was the American version of the Italian album L'Isola di Niente. Really good live albums, fairly noisy copy. I think they may all have been. And the other item I picked up was Stomu Yamashita's Go, with Steve Winwood and Michael Shreve credited on the cover. Klaus Schulze is also on this. It's not great. I heard it before, never actually owned it, but it's okay. The last track on it, which is one of the Steve Winwood vocal pieces, is really good. Otherwise, it's just kind of middling in my opinion. And speaking of Steve Winwood, I got a copy of the first Traffic album, Mr. Fantasy, the US edition, of course. And this is, I guess you'd say it was the third pressing or third version. I was actually looking for the fourth version, the one that I had back in the day, which had a particular label with the orange and black design, as opposed to this orange and red one. But this was in really nice condition, and it was a good deal, so I couldn't pass it up. So this is the one. And as with the Beatles and Rolling Stones, the U.S. record company changed this around to As with those bands, they didn't include the singles on the original albums, and Traffic didn't on their first album in the UK. So the US record company put on the singles, Paper Sun and Hole in My Shoe and Smiling Phases, and dropped a couple of other songs. And in my opinion, they really did improve the album that way. One of the songs they dropped was Utterly Simple by Dave Mason, which I consider easily the weakest track on the album. So getting Smiling Phases and Paper Sun instead of that was a good bargain, I think. And the oddity of the, well, there are a couple of oddities about the US version. One is that they put little psychedelic sounds in between, drawn from yet another non-LP track from Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush. And they split Paper Sun, have the main song opening the album, and then the coda closes the album under the title, We're a Fade, You Missed This. The original version was, our original US version was under the title Heaven is in Your Mind. After the first pressing, they changed it to Mr. Fantasy. So there were two versions on the original label, and then this one is the second label, which makes it the third version overall. And staying in the classic rock arena, Buffalo Springfield Retrospective, fine best of set from 1969, released not that long after the last Buffalo Springfield album of their three. Very nice artwork by Eve Babbitts. This is in beautiful condition for an original pressing. This is a first edition. It's got that late 60s Atco inner sleeve, no less. Let alone the yellow Atco label, which was available for quite a while. Focuses heavily on the first two Buffalo Springfield albums. You get, I think, 4 songs from the first one, including, of course, For What It's Worth, which opens this album. It wasn't on the first album initially, but they put it on after it became a hit. More of that putting the single on the album practice. And of course, that's a song I find it a little hard to hear nowadays. I mean, literally to hear, just because it's so overexposed. Has there ever been a movie or a TV show about the 60s that didn't have For What It's Worth in the soundtrack somewhere? Great song anyway. Mr. Soul, Kind Woman, the Richie Furay song on here, Bluebird, On the Way Home, written by Neil Young, sung by Richie Furay. Nowadays, Clancy Can't Even Sing, ditto. Great Neil Young songs, Broken Arrow and Expecting to Fly. So a very fine compilation. Rolling Stones, Between the Buttons. I never owned a mono Rolling Stones album before, but there it is on the red mono London label. And I'm also not used to the American track listing. Again, tampering with the track listing to include singles. This has Let's Spend the Night Together and Ruby Tuesday, which was a bit of a pointless inclusion because they went and repeated those songs on the next US release, Flowers. Then I suppose they're worth repeating. They bear repeating. Okay, this was not a planned edit. I just had somebody drag something very noisy past the window and kind of necessitated a little intervention. Okay, the first great rock festivals of the 70s, featuring recordings from the 1970 Isle of Wight and Atlanta Pop Festivals. Kind of odd package. This would seem to be the back cover, since the spine is this way, so you'd expect this to be the front cover. But it doesn't work out that way. And I don't know if I can get this all on the screen. The way it folds out. This is, to the best of my knowledge, only the third ever triple LP in rock after Woodstock and All Things Must Pass. So as you can see, it features Jimi Hendrix, Johnny Winter, Sly and the Family Stone, Miles Davis, 10 Years After, Procol Harum, Allman Brothers, Poco, Leonard Cohen, and so on. I actually had this in my collection already. This was a replacement. My old copy had a skip in the Sly and the Family Stone section, so I am pleased to own a skipless copy. And now is where the edit is supposed to be. Okay, I'm going to try and go through the rest quickly because I'm running low on time, having to get back to work from home. Banco. This is the version for the English-speaking world. This was released in the USA, but this is actually a British copy. And as with PFM, this is on the Manticore label and features re-recordings of tracks from Banco's first 3 albums in English, plus a new recording that had not been released till this album. The great Francesco Di Giacomo, the late great, on Shoe and Nudeness and vocals, by the way. First solo album by Bill Bruford, or the first album by the Bruford Group. Spine and label credit this to Bill Bruford, but the cover just says Bruford, and that did become the band name for the band with Dave Stewart on keyboards, Alan Holdsworth on guitar, Jeff Berlin on bass, and on this album, Annette Peacock on vocals. All the later Bruford albums were instrumental, so sadly no more Annette. Nice inner sleeve. This is the US pressing on Polydor. Yoko Ono Fly. This is her second solo album for Apple, and this is the reissue on white vinyl. And I love that they use the grapefruit to replace the apple. This includes all the little goodies. It's got a postcard, it's got the poster, it's got a nice little booklet as well. And this is my absolute favorite Yoko album. The first one, the Yoko Ono Plastic Ono Band, comes close, but I just really love this one. Gravity by Fred Frith, of course well known for Henry Cow and a multitude of other projects. This was the first of his albums for the Ralph label, of course associated with the Residents. Playing alongside members of Zamla Mama's Mana from Sweden and the Muffins from the USA. Excellent, excellent album. A lot more accessible, I think, than most people might find Henry Cow. It's still a very creative and interesting album. And also on the Fred Frith tip, his collaboration with Tom Cora's Skeleton Crew and their album Learn to Talk. This is difficult to describe. It's like a two-man, one-man band, I think was their hook. And this is very avant, but not without its approachable side. And it's hilarious. There are a lot of samples from television, you know, like Ronald Reagan speaking. This is from the Reagan years. Hard to describe. Tom Cora on cello, bass guitar, Casio drums, homemade drums, and contraptions, plus singing. Fred Frith on guitar, 6-string bass, violin, Casio, homemade bass, piano, drums, and singing. Yes, there are songs, real songs. Great stuff, nonetheless. Why did I say that? I don't know why I said that. Steve Hackett, Please Don't Touch, his second solo album from 1978, featuring some interesting guests, Steve Walsh and Phil Ehart from Kansas, Richie Havens on vocals, Chester Thompson and Tom Fowler from, at that point associated with Frank Zappa's group, holding down the rhythm section. Really fine album. Worthy follow-up to his superb Voyage of the Acolyte, and a similar album to Voyage of the Acolyte, an album by an ex-Genesis guitarist with guest appearances by Phil Collins and Mike Rutherford from the parent band, Anthony Phillips in his first album, The Geese and the Ghost. Now, this is a more classical project, but definitely shares the Genesis DNA. And I always really strongly associate those two albums, Voyage of the Acolyte and The Geese and the Ghost, to the point where I have this false memory that they were released right around the same time, when in fact they were 2 years apart. And more prog rock guitar goodness, Robert Fripp and Andy Summers, I Advance Masked. More in the 80s King Crimson vein than the Police vein, but there's a rhythmic approach that's sort of a compromise between the two. So, really nice album. Not as earth-shaking as that 1981. This was from 1982, was it? Recorded in May 82 and September 81. So, right around the time following the Discipline album. That's the one that was earth-shaking. Finally, an album from Tangerine Dream, 1976, Stratosphere. And this is a UK copy on the Green Virgin label. I spoke about the Virgin label in my response to Chris Propfee recently, and so I mentioned that there were a lot of variations, and there's one. Love this album. This was when Tangerine Dream moved from their more spacey and improvisational side to a more composed format. And on this album, they do it very, very well indeed. TD. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Be well and stay safe. Talk with you again soon. Bye-bye for now.